So this is the monthly meeting for OpenChain. It's the central meeting, so it's where we do the spec and the education stuff. If you're new to the project and you're watching this recording, this is essentially where we do things like edit the standards and work on the reference material. We do have other work groups doing all types of stuff from SBOM quality to AI compliance through to local work groups in places like Japan and Korea doing things in their own language. You'll find everything in the participation page on the website. But here is where we formally do the specs and we formally prepare the official project reference material. Now, before we get started, antitrust policy notice, as always. This is shown at the beginning of every OpenChain and every Linux Foundation meeting, full policy on the Linux Foundation website. And if you have any questions, if you're from a LF member company, you can ask our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. And if you're not from an LF member, please direct questions to your own counsel. Now, today's agenda is something of a wrap up of various things we've been doing. We've had a brief pause in our meetings, so we didn't have meetings in April because we had several important events, including a meeting with the board and mini summits and so on. And what we're doing now is assessing where we're at and letting people know where we're going next. On the specification side, this reflection is actually going to be bigger than simply a month or two. It's going to be reflecting on lessons learned. What we did in making ISO 18974. So making a security standard between 2021 until 2023. What we've been doing with preparing draft updates to our license and security standards and making those proposals in 24 and into this year. We're going to reflect on that. And Chris, the chair of specification, will help lead our reflections, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some insight to other projects looking at creating or updating standards in their own domain, whether they're doing something that's a specification, whether it's a de facto industry standard or a formal standard. Right. And on the education side of things, various stuff has been added, updated, prepared, and we'll have a quick look at what's going on there. OpenChain has a lot of reference material, over 1,000 documents. So we've we've had a tremendous amount of development in the last 8 years, and we've been very fortunate, I think, in the last 12 months or so, to have some new material released and some material updated that's fairly central to organizations doing open source management. But let's dive right in. So, specification work group. Reflections time. We had draft updates to our two existing ISO standards, 5230 for license compliance, 18974 for security assurance. And essentially, we spent a little bit over a year looking at the specifications and getting feedback from all around, and making some proposed updates. We went through a public comment period, we went through a freeze period, and that all ended towards the end of March 2025. And what's happened now is, with all of the public comments and freeze completed on the draft suggestions, they're going to a formal meeting of our steering committee to vote yes or no. So it's the perfect time to reflect on what we learned making the ISO standard for open source security assurance in 2021 to 2023, and then our process of gathering feedback and drafting proposed updates to both of our ISO standards in the 2023-ish, 2024 through to 2025 period. And the goal would be to chat about this briefly, to maybe provide some insight or context for other projects, making or maintaining standards or specifications, or planning to do so in future. So I wanted to, Chris, if I could, call you in and see, if you have any reflections. You've been on this for about 4 years now, more back and forth, contributing and then co-chair of SPEC and then chair of SPEC. Um, how do you think it's gone? Building open standards using our processes and approach. Do you think that we've had any rough edges, any lessons learned?
I think that we've had a lot of lessons learned since I first joined OpenChain as a contributor back a number of years ago, and I don't remember when that was. So I joined on the licensing specification because I had been involved as the program office uh, chair for our company and in open source licensing and compliance. And so we stood up our first semi OSPO and those things around what we thought was important as a company. So at the same time, I was also working with contributing to the licensing specification. And when we decided to go forward with creating the software assurance specification 18974, we really were able to capitalize on a lot of the things that we'd learned and that Shane had so well documented for us in the repository. So it made starting that one easier, and we were used to as an international group working together with the experts so that everyone had their voice listened to and their thoughts and ideas and things that were important to them incorporated into the specification as appropriate. And I thought that that went very well for us across the time. The hardest thing that I saw with the specifications uh, teams, both licensing and software assurance, was that because we're so split up across the world, naturally, 24 hours difference, uh, people are in the middle of their evening sleep and they have to disturb their nocturnal schedule to participate in the meeting. And that makes it difficult to get everyone and have everyone participate in all of the discussions. So it's going to be interesting to see how we get reorganized, maybe in that vein, for the update sessions, so that we can get a broader cross section of the world to contribute to the specification to make them relevant for everyone, rather than just having a few of us making all of the calls and decisions, because it really should be a collaborative effort, especially on something like open source. Uh, with what we're doing, what we think is important for licensing and compliance, and what we think is important for the software assurance security realm.
It's a very good point. And we've had the mailing list and so on for async, but in practice, an awful lot of our work, the vast majority of the work has taken place on the calls, and we do tend to bounce around North America, Europe, and then um, I think it's North America, Asia, but it's very hard to conceive of a way to bring everyone together. Do you think that there's an approach we could take on drafting that might be able to circumvent this? Because you have a lot of experience in standards, and I wonder, how other orgs deal with the time zones and distribution to try to maximize people in the main editing activity, and we found that in practice, people don't tend to make their maximum contributions on the mailing list. It's on these calls. Do you have any idea of how we might facilitate this based on what you've seen elsewhere?
I've I've seen a few things that I think we should not use as models, and one of them is where a group of people from a country, from a university, from a business, from whatever uh, structure get together and they say, we think that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we want to get a specification out for it. And so they end up being the convener for the group, and they end up having all the editors for the group. And then the rest of the people are get a chance to look at the drafts as they're making progress through at certain stages. And so that's kind of like our telephone list where you don't really get the best possible uh, representation across the world. And I've noticed that because I go back and I look at the contributors list, the people who have actually submitted comments or proposals or uh, given sections of intellectual thinking uh, to the spec group to incorporate into the specification and then circulate it for comment. So that method is I think we would really need to think about that, talk about it, and decide how we're going to best do that. I do agree it is easier to get a North America with Europe or North America with Asia lined up. I don't know if there is a way that we can do it where we're on the beginning of the day for Asia, we're in the cusp of the day for Europe, and we're in the early evening with North America. I don't know, but I think that's something that we should look at to see if we, because it's always best if you've got all the minds talking and conversing with each other and sharing ideas and adjusting those ideas and getting that immediate agreement from people or disagreement so that we can properly record it and actually get a consensus versus I'm too sleepy to dial in at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I'd rather do just not worry about what they're saying and just accept it.
Right. And one thing we found, just as a side note, was that on AI, we're making an AI guide, and the AI work group is really busy. But in practice, the AI work group has been really busy on the North America Europe call, and the Europe Asia call has essentially not worked out. It's had very little attendance. So in that case, they've been refocusing on that North America Europe call as the primary.
Yeah,
And perhaps, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
that's problematic in my opinion from having watched what's happening with say the ISOspec because I participate in those every day, every week, every thinking minute. No, not every, but quite a bit of it. So the problem is that, and I have seen China pulling back from a lot of the AI participation and trying to go their own way with things like the public cryptography competition that NIST was running for the world because they just didn't feel or that it, I don't know what they felt, but they have been pulling back from that, and I don't want the representation of the world to start pulling back, because then we'll start getting uh, just such different ideas documented, and yet the world is a global trade zone of some size with each country. And so if we're developing and building and testing and certifying things to an entirely different thought process in our specifications, how are we going to be able to trust what we sell is properly accepted, and what we buy, that how are they going to know that we're going to comply with the same specifications and thought processes and accept them? It's something that we really need to sit down and probably talk about a little bit more.
Absolutely. It's top of mind for me as well, because, for instance, on this monthly call, while we're not actively editing a standard right now, it is the touch point for two of our most important work groups, and attendance is relatively low. And one reason is perhaps because in Asia it's now 2 a.m. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And another reason is perhaps because we're not in the middle of an edit cycle. There's very little to noodle on. It's more of a strategic moment. But at the same time, what I'd like to do is try to make sure that we can bring people to the table and we do provide a way. And just like you said, I don't want us to leave anyone behind. So where we have low attendance, I think we need to think, why is that and how do we improve it? So on, for instance, AI, we're still trying to think through how do we improve Asian engagement? Uh, and part of that might be timing. Part of it might be politics that we just can't address inside this project. Uh, but we should definitely explore it. And for us, with the standards, we've been doing this monthly cadence with two meetings, one good for Asia, one good for Europe. But yeah, let's talk more about how we can try to improve it, how we can try to make more space at the table for people and make it more convenient. It's critical. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and I think that the one last point that I'd like to make is that, and you touched on it briefly there when you mentioned the AI group is off frantically working, is that the AI group needs to remember that AI starts with software development, ends with software development, and AI is nothing but software. And they need to be working with us on our software assurance and our license assurance guides to incorporate their requirements into that and meld and accept the requirements that are in those guides, so that the software that's out there will will fit the same mold. Because right now I've seen a big schism in the difference between ISO. The AI guys want to go it alone, and they are reinventing all of these assurance specifications and licensing specifications, and the total disregard for license compliance. And I have spoken up numerous times and turned down or voted negatively on a specification update because what they're doing is not right. So I think that in order to not do that for the OpenChain project, we ought to highly encourage us to all become integrated and build a set of specifications that where they overlap, they all need to be in the top level specification. And since AI
it's a
is software, it really needs to be to the extent that open source software is playing in the AI models, we need to use it.
Absolutely. And it kind of touches on a point, which is I think we might be in a situation where it will be productive for our work group groups to maybe spend more time on this central monthly call. For instance, the AI work group, the SBOM work group, to have them dial in and give updates and also maybe take questions and comments and answer questions so we can centralize a little more. Perhaps that might be useful. What do you think?
Yeah, I really think that it would be totally useful because so many of the rules and regulations that are coming out of, and I'll just speak to the United States here, but I know it's also happening in Europe on software that are incorporating the SBOMs as a generated product of the software that you're developing, that you have that adequate representation in that SBOM of what that software is made up with, not just that let's just say IBM built it, but that they use the open source software and then, list the provenance and pedigree for every one of those pieces of software components that they've sucked in from the open source world, because they have to be part of the SBOM. And the SBOM is how we prove that the software was built and delivered in a thoughtful manner. So
Absolutely.
I'll let the
Well,
legal people talk about that stuff.
I saw Alin had his hand up just to uh, open the floor.
Thank you, Shane. One idea would be to start a global call trial with Europe early morning, because that way we have the whole Europe, we have Asia, and we get West Coast at some time, which is reasonable.
That's a good idea. Maybe we can use next month as an experiment for running that. And
Oh,
perhaps we can have, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
like the like the schedule that you had before, where we were doing stuff Pacific Coast time and Asia and Europe.
Maybe similar, but let's try to make it less painful.
Got it.
During the summertime, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Alan.
During the European summertime. So now, it works fairly well because in Europe it will be 7 a.m. and then we basically roll the clock from there.
Not too bad.
Yeah, it's manageable.
Okay, because AI actually starts 7 a.m. Pacific, but we can't go. We're gonna have to work on it because, for instance, Chris is Central, so we'll juggle it. We'll aim to do it. And what I'll try to do then for next month is to ask AI and SBOM to join us and give us updates, and try to set a call time where maybe everyone could dial in and encourage everyone to have this big global update and see how it goes.
Okay,
Right.
that sounds
Brilliant.
good. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Chris. So, just very quick recap. Uh, we've had pretty good processes. We've been able to openly develop the standards, getting everyone at the table at the place where people are most likely to do work, which is on a live editing call, is a challenge. And we tend to be fragmented between the time zones. So it's still something we're trying to overcome. But certainly, as we work it out, we'll share that with other projects as well. Right. Let's move on to education. Andrew, quite a bit going on in education as usual.
There is. Yes, thank you, Shane. And Chris, by the way, thanks very much for leading a really interesting discussion earlier. But yeah, you're doing great work over there on the specification side. So it's really great to see that. Yes, lots of things happening. Shane, I might want to share my screen. Is it okay?
Yep,
Can you
absolutely. I'm just going
hand
to
over
turn.
control?
There you go. It's all yours.
Right. Excellent. Okay. Just let me Right, now it wants me to open my system settings, and is that actually working? Can you see that?
Yep, everything's working.
Right. Okay. So you should be able to see the page from the OpenChain website that's got reference to the reference library. Yes. It normally gets a little green line around the outside, which I can't see at the moment. So
No,
hopefully you
we
can
can
see that. Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
It's working.
Excellent. Okay. Good stuff. Right. So Shane, you have done some spectacularly good work on this. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, we've got a huge amount of materials available to us on the OpenChain website, and it has historically been a little bit difficult to navigate around those, simply for reasons of the fact that over the years, many more documents have been appearing. So I know you put a lot of effort into reorganizing all of this. And here it is in GitHub. And I'm not going to go through and explain what you've done because it is self-explanatory. If you're looking for an open source policy template, you click on open source policy template, and it's as simple as that. So that really is a vast improvement. So thanks very much indeed for your efforts there. It's made life a lot easier for all of us. I don't know if you want to add anything to that at all, anything else that people should be looking at there.
I think in essence, the main thing that I'd flag, which is sort of self-explanatory, is the README is the guide to everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we change it in the future, it's the go to the README. So I suppose what I'm going to suggest then is ideally people will always send themselves and their friends to the root, to the reference material
Yeah, exactly.
URL, and then have a look at the README to see where things are. Because we might need group documents in the future, or we might add new ones. And just one example is that when the AI work group finishes their guide, and if the board approves it, it'll be in the AI compliance folder, but they might shift around names and add subfolders and so. So people should start at the root and use the nice index to get around. That would be my note.
I think that makes sense, and it also means that the links are going to be more persistent. I mean, I know you've done a lot of work in updating the various links around the OpenChain website. And on the off chance that one or two may be broken, if you can let us know, then we can sort those out. But yeah, so that's a vast improvement. Accessibility to information is key. As we all know, the most important thing about open source is reducing friction, and this is a great friction reducer. So thank you very much for that. Right. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was the policy template. So this is a template which I developed and then has been subsequently amended and added to by a whole bunch of people and has got a great amount of traction. It's been translated into a number of different languages. And people have been actively engaging with it, which is great. We've had some suggestions over. I'd like to particularly say thanks to Gary Armstrong for some of his suggestions. He noticed some sort of fairly serious inconsistencies in the terminology and a little bit of sort of failure in the logic of various parts of it. So hopefully those have now been corrected, and this really gave me an opportunity to go through the whole thing and clarify it and improve navigation, improve some of the terminology that wasn't particularly clear, and so on and so forth. So hopefully this is much more usable now than it has been in the past. So I know that there's quite a few deployments of this already. The one thing that I would stress is that this is only a template. It's not something that you have to implement in order to be compliant with ISO 5230. It is just one of many ways to reach compliance. So anyone who makes use of it, please don't just sort of cut and paste the whole thing. It's important that you consider whether it's appropriate for your organization, make appropriate changes, etc., because an awful lot of the stuff in here are just suggestions. Now, Shane, I could spend a couple of minutes for those who aren't familiar with it, just going through a quick navigation. I'm not going to go through all the changes that I've made, but just to remind people how to use it. So again, now that I know this screen sharing sort of works, then I can just switch to the other window. So bear with me for a second.
While Andrew's doing that, I'll just send a reminder to people that having a good open source policy has long been one of the bugbears of companies. And previously people said, okay, show me another company's policy. And then Andrew came up with this thing, which is like Lego for options.
Yeah, exactly. So again, like all of the other OpenChain materials, this has got a sort of start here README page. So you'll see there's a bunch of tabs down here at the bottom. The first place to start is, strangely enough, start here. I'm not going to go through in detail what this says, but there's a brief intro about what this is all about. It explains how the template works. And then, so that corresponds with these tabs down here. So there's the policy tab itself, and then there's a number of appendices. And I'll just run through each of these fairly rapidly. So if we look at the policy tab, this is the most important of the tabs. And you will see that if you look in column C here, what we have is the verbatim wording from ISO 5230. So if you were to cut and paste this into a text document, you would get the OpenChain specification. And then against each paragraph of that, I've characterized each paragraph into a specific category. So TX is text, for example. And so if you sort of click on this little note here, okay, it's not working in LibreOffice, but it also says on the Start Here page what each of these particular categories means. And if you recall the layout of the OpenChain specification itself, you will recall that there are verification materials for each of the requirements. And basically, these lead to conformance questions that correspond with the conformance questionnaire that's on the OpenChain website. And then this corresponds with the policy text. So there's an extremely close mapping between the specification itself, each paragraph of the specification, each requirement within the specification, and then some sample wording in there that is aimed at fulfilling that particular requirement. And that is continued throughout the whole of the specification. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail. I encourage people to have a look for themselves. But you can see that it's the key to this is this very close mapping between the policy text and the requirement. So one of the things that should be very easy to do, for example, is auditing your OpenChain conformance, because it should be very easy for you to be able to map particular policy wording against a particular requirement in the specification. So I'll just go through the other tabs very, very quickly. So there are a number of roles. So you'll be aware that the program participants, depending on the size of the organization, so these are all the people who are involved in helping to deliver the OpenChain conformant program. And these will depend on your organization. The ones that I've highlighted in this rather fetching sort of orangey color here are the roles that are specifically referred to in the policy themselves. But then there are other roles down here which you are likely to find in any sort of medium-sized organization. If you're a larger organization, you need to add additional roles. If you're a smaller organization, that you will want to cull this list somewhat. And this is probably a good time to remind everyone that the OpenChain specification is designed to work with all ranges of organizations. And we've worked with global multinationals implementing an OpenChain conformant program. We've also worked with tiny organizations that have maybe 2 or 3 developers. And that's the beauty of the OpenChain specification, is that it works for organizations of all sizes. So this is a sample licenses grid. This is something that will very much have to be tailored to each individual organization as well. Most of you will be very familiar with this. It just has a list of some typical licenses in there and how they're categorized. And this enables us to fill the obligation under the OpenChain specification that we understand the categories of licenses and we understand the broad obligations that go with those particular licenses. There is a source acceptability criteria section in here. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this basically is one possible process that an organization can follow if they're going to be ingesting third-party materials, and to ensure not only that those materials are available under appropriate licenses, but also that they do fulfill various quality, provenance metrics, etc. But this is very, very high level, and it will need to be tailored to each individual organization. There's incident mapping page here, which covers the severity criteria. It's basically designed to help people if a query comes in, if it's something that is deemed to be serious. So if somebody is alleging a serious breach of an open source license, for example, then it's to help the thought process in terms of triaging that query and determining whether it's something that needs to be escalated very, very rapidly and dealt with very, very rapidly, or whether it's something that can follow a more standard path. And then finally, we have a tab here, which against each, you'll recall the roles tab 1, against each of these roles, then what sort of training we suggest that one of each of those roles should undertake, and then there's a selection of sort of sample modules which may be available, and this indicates which modules are appropriate for which roles. And again, this will have to be tailored for each organization, but it just gives an idea of the way in which the policy can be set up and implemented. So that's a sort of very brief whistle-stop tour through everything that the policy does. And we are always very happy to accept any suggestions and updates, and we have been receiving those, and the thing is a living document. We have been improving it over the past few years. I know it's gone live in a number of organizations, and it's great to see that our OpenChain country groups, many of them have undertaken the translation process for it as well. So I really, really appreciate that. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about that right now. I'm assuming that's all good. Yeah.
Well, I don't have a question. I just have an observation that I'm going to be explicitly asking our country groups to try to translate this update as soon as possible. I'll be talking with the Korea and Japan work groups in the next couple of weeks. So I hope that we'll have that in play sooner rather than later.
Excellent. No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Shane. Martin.
Yeah, I guess kind of following on from that, I was just going to ask what the next steps for it actually were, or the plans going forward. Obviously, having some translations would be one. I guess kind of thinking a bit more generally, and it's an excellent resource, and I know that because I've used it. The format, however, is a bit of a pain in the ass, and that's a difficult problem that's perhaps not easy to solve. And obviously, we've got most of the stuff in Markdown and stuff like that. And I've been trying to figure out how we could perhaps arrange it to be a little bit easier for copying and pasting and modifying and pick and choose bits for people. I don't have any answer for that. But I think that would be a good way for looking at going forward, and also it might make it a bit easier for maintaining. For example, those appendixes probably change less often than the rest of the bits. But anyway, that's just questions and ask for thoughts rather than answers.
Yeah, no, excellent, Martin. I completely concur with that. It is a tricky problem, and I mean, particularly, it's not very GitHub friendly, having a spreadsheet format. And ideally, we would be able to sort of track the changes more easily using GitHub's native version control. And it is a little bit difficult as it stands at the moment. So, any suggestions about how we might be able to make this more consistent with the various other documentation that we've got on there, very gratefully accepted, as obviously would be any offers to sort of convert the documents into those formats as well. But no, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
That sort of touches on an issue which goes for all of our stuff. Some things are very quickly expressed in spreadsheets, but quite difficult to edit or to comprehend as an editor. And yet, if we turn it into, let's say, a flat data format, we end up with a volume of endless scrolling. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we shall leave that as an open question, as Martin very kindly left it, rather than demanding an answer now. So that is very much appreciated. But any suggestions? Please send them in. Great. Okay, I think that covers that topic. So the next one I wanted to cover was the OpenChain adoption guide. And again, I will see if I can share my screen. Here we go. So this is very much down to Shane and his wrangling of AI technology. I have had a brief look through it, and I think it looks sort of really good in first glance. I think as a sort of starting off point, it's great. I don't know, Shane, do you want to sort of give an intro to this at all, since you're the guiding mind and light behind it?
Right. So we had some feedback from user companies that are dealing with supply chains, and we have a supplier education leaflet, and we have tons of individual documents. But the feedback from the companies wrangling the supply chain was that companies find it a bit difficult to, let's say, browse the library piecemeal and put things together. And our supplier education was focused on saying this is open source and, compliance is important. Here's some standards. But there was a need for a bridging item which said, here's how this company might do it. Here's how that company might do it. Here's how you might fill in a process point. And we're not trying to tell you that you should do this, but here's how you might. So with that in mind, I started drafting this. And at the same time, I thought to myself, well, AI is being both discussed broadly and criticized broadly. To what extent can AI accelerate the editing of something like this? And to what extent does it provide good input and output? And when there's a human editor guiding something in development, can it make stuff faster and its errors or omissions be quick to correct? So, partly that's the experiment, and partly the guide is very, very practical based on market demand. And what we then have now is a bare bones approach, which is obviously extremely tweakable. It needs to be tweaked and expanded. But it seems like we've got a good start between myself and the LLM and some existing material. Mostly now, because our reference library is reborn as a beautiful phoenix, the guide would be referencing the reference library and hopefully referencing other projects more frequently. So one example is Software Heritage has an ISO standard for software identification. to mention things like that, to mention open source tooling projects and to add stuff in. But anyway, instead of a blank page, we have things describing small, medium, and large companies, pros and cons of different approaches. Some of it comes from AI, some of it comes from tweaking, some of it comes from writing, and it doesn't look like a disaster. I think it might be filling the gap, but it now needs other people to help add in references and to
Yeah.
help link to useful stuff.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very valuable resource, and it is a really really great starting point. Although I would like to know, because first of all, you've not just put in a prompt saying, write me a guide to OpenChain implementation. So your prompt is pretty comprehensive. There's been obviously quite a lot of sort of prompt engineering going on there. How many different iterations of the prompt did you try?
Right. That's a very good question. Actually, only about 4 or 5, because
Interesting.
what I did
Yeah.
is I started small and
Yeah.
then I just kept on typing to narrow it down.
Right. Yeah.
And I, I,
Yeah.
I must say, one of the great things we have is that several LLMs, I've tried DeepThink, I've tried Gemma, I've tried Quinn, which is the Alibaba one, and I've tried Llama. All of them are pretty well aware of OpenChain in that they've eaten our
Hmm.
data and eaten other people's data. So they're all not terrible at talking about us. And in this case, it was really a situation of knowing what I wanted, having some sketches of what I wanted for myself, and to ask the LLM in more and more detail to give me something good, and then to begin messing with that output and refining it against what I knew I wanted. But anyway, only 4 or 5 iterations and not starting over.
Right. Excellent.
It was
No, that's really
remarkable.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's superb. Right. Okay. So, any sort of feedback, comments on this one? I mean, my proposal is that this should um, go forward to further development, and should be open to comments. I think it's a very valuable resource.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether that means we should be just publishing the LLM prompts to people and let them find the information that way. But perhaps that's a bit too radical at the moment.
It
I
does
think
need some
we,
ideate. It does need some. So, for instance, it will talk about, let's say, vendors' tooling solutions as if they were the only thing out there at times and whatnot.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think fundamentally though we've still got an awful lot of material, and that is
Yeah.
still a problem. Um, and as I privately sent to you earlier today, Shane. I mean, I think this is great, but this is not, as I say, the company size is not necessarily the correct way or best way to skin the cat. You can have a huge company that only has a few developers, um, and probably the SME model is perhaps more appropriate to them than looking straight at the large companies. Um, and we also have the capability model as well. So I'm not sure if there's a not for now, but whether
Yeah.
there's a better way of kind of doing it as more of a you're here and you need to get there, and these are the resources that can help you to do that.
Hmm.
Perhaps it's starting from supplier leaflet kind of thing, then onto this kind of page, and then from there to like a capability model. You choose in particular areas what capability you think you want to be aiming for, and then perhaps that
Yeah.
goes to the capability model, and the capability model points to the resources that says, here's how you can find out more about how to do this. That's one possibility, again, that
Hmm.
perhaps is worth looking at. Again, it's more questions than answers, but I think we're kind of at that state now, right? We've got an awful lot of material. The difficulty
Yes.
is people finding it and working out what's the most important thing and the quickest things for them to find and look at. And actually, I say going forward, perhaps it will be LLMs that will do that for us
Yeah.
in 5 years' time.
Yeah, and I think some graphics would probably be useful, some sort of flow chart saying, start here. These are the things you need to look at. And so I think, no, I like that idea. I think that would sort of help to guide people through all the documentation. So yeah, thanks, Martin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're at early days, and Martin you might remember about a year and a half or 2 years ago, I experimented with an LLM make a case study for us, and it kind of threw out some interesting stuff. And I'd lost some of the prompts, so it was like, that's interesting, but I can't replicate it. But things have come along considerably in those 2 years. So it seems that not LLM can't make stuff for us, but in combination with a human who knows our stuff, LLMs
Hmm.
can dramatically reduce the time to begin producing material.
Yes, yes. I'm very positively predisposed towards Google and its AI at the moment, because I did actually ask it to work out what my body mass index was, and it dramatically. We said I was dramatically slimmer than I actually am. So you know, flattery will get you anywhere. Right.
This is always the
Excellent.
criteria we like to judge industry now.
Yes, exactly. I'm extremely shallow, so I will admit that. Right, super. Okay, well that's great. And then I'm sorry. Can we go back to the original slides, Shane? So I think we were then
Yeah,
going to talk about the education curriculum material in general, if I remember
absolutely.
correctly.
Yes.
And so this is something that we've been sort of talking about for a little while. Obviously, you know, there's a lot of material on there, and a lot of it has been improved significantly through some previous iterations of the education work group, and other people have sort of put input in there as well. But I think you know, it does make sense to keep that under review, and I think there's certain parts of that could you know, definitely be improved. I mean, personally, what I would like to see is coordination between, if you recall, when we were looking at the OpenChain open source policy template, the training section on there, so something that maps more closely between which module, which particular role within a program participant had what particular training they needed to have, and you know, if it turns out that what we end up with within the curriculum section itself looks radically different to what's on that tab in the policy template, I have no problem with that. It's just a question of then ripping that tab out of the policy template and putting the curriculum one in, because this obviously needs to be driven by well, first of all, the OpenChain specification itself, but the content and the use of the training material. So I think this is sort of pretty much an open discussion. You know, people who've been using the materials are aware that there are areas that it can be improved, and I'm not suggesting that we sort of focus individually on what they are now, but I think that's a useful activity for the education work group to take on, to start looking at that and determining what can usefully be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. So maybe that's the next to-do item for education, to sit down and
Mm-hmm.
start consolidating this stuff.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Okay, well, I think that covers everything that I needed to talk about. So thank you, Shane, and back over to you
Brilliant.
again.
Thank you, Andrew. That's a really good summary and so much ground covered. In the last year and a half, you've been doing a tremendous job of producing material that has been very, I think, practical. Chris, hands up. So over to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, Andrew, about is there some way that you could mechanize that to where you had whatever tool it is that you're using to help you to categorize all of this information, to evaluate it by the number of hits by people and
Mm-hmm.
their duration time spent looking at these sections in order to kind of place it in some kind of a ranking of popularity?
That's a really, really interesting idea. Such a thing must exist. I have no idea how to go about it, but I think that's a really excellent idea. Definitely, yes.
Yes, it's intriguing actually. Chris, if there's anyone in your circle who might be able to help us narrow down ways to approach that, it could be really,
Yes.
really useful.
Yeah, let me try. I know a few people. I'll talk to some folks, and Andrew or Martin, if you've got some folks in your organization that might be able to help with some of that, that might be a interesting project to get some people collaborating on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Of course, all of this goes, even beyond OpenChain and our reference library. Ultimately, we're noodling about ways to make business process management and open source better. So, fantastic as we explore this stuff. Right. I think we're at the any other business segment. So does anyone have any other business today? If not, we've closed the meeting. Thank you all for being here. This recording will go out to the community. For those of you watching the recording and thinking that conversation doesn't seem finished, well, it's not. You're very much invited to be part of it. You can do so on the mailing list, joining the next call, or going to GitHub and opening issues. The most important thing is to know that we're having discussions to think through stuff and to make things better. And wherever you are, whoever you are, you're part of this too. Right. See you all next time. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for helping make this display of where we're at.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.